Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Tech Showdown. I'm your host, Kevin, and today we're going to be putting up the Msi Twin Frozr R9-290 against the Tri-X from Sapphire R9-290. So, another R9-290 showdown. This one should be quite interesting. The MSI 290 is quite popular, so we'll just have to see how it goes. Now, the first difference between these two cars obviously is the coolers. So the MSI is rocking its Twin Frozr. This is the Twin Frozr 4 cooler that a lot of people have been talking about. So it runs two fans, has aluminium fins, and runs their super pipe technology, which is apparently transfers the heat twice as fast through the heat pipes. So that's quite good and better fan design. Now they also have their military class components, which is just, better solid caps and high C caps and stuff like that. Apparently this is to make the card more reliable, but also allow for better overclocks on it. And it also has very nice backplate and black PCB, so it's all very nice with the MSI Twin Frozr. Now the Tri-X, on the other hand, this cooler I really like. It runs a 3-fan design, quite thick, decent sized heat sinks on it. It's quite long, and I just really like the design. It's really solid. It looks awesome. It just seems like it's a more a bare bones kind of just more is better kind of thing. So having 3 fans instead of 2, and also having a much longer heat sinks on them, longer heat pipes and stuff like that. So have to see if the smaller Twin Frozr but more advanced cooler is better than the sort of bigger but less advanced. I say that, keep it in perspective. Obviously, the Tri-X cooler is still advanced. It's still good. Cooler of the Tri-X. And as I've said before, I mean, that Power Color PCS Plus cooler, which I still think is probably the best, or very close to the Vapor X in terms of the best coolers we've tested previously. The PCS Plus cooler is just huge. It's nothing special. It's just huge. Big heat sinks, big heat pipes, big everything. And it does the job really well. So, but getting into size, so the MSI Twin Frozr comes in at 276 millimeters long, compared to the Tri-X's 305 millimeters long. So the Tri-X is quite a bit longer. As I've said previously, depending on your case, you may need to take out a hard drive cage or something like that to fit it. It is quite long. The Twin Frozr is 127 millimeters wide to the 113 millimeters wide of the Tri-X, so the Tri-X isn't as fat, and they're very similar in height, with the Twin Frozr being 39 millimeters tall and the Tri-X being 38 millimeters tall, so really no difference there. But keep in mind that the Tri-X is a decent amount longer than the Twin Frozr. Now, there's also a bit of difference in the speeds. So on the GPU front, they're exactly the same. Both are clocked at 1000 megahertz or 1 gigahertz. There is a difference in the memory. So the MSI, like a lot of them, is running reference memory speeds, which I'm always a little bit disappointed when they do this. I think if you're going to bump up the GPU, you may as well bump up the memory as well. And the Tri-X does have bumped up memory just to 5200 megahertz, the reference being 5000, and that's what the Twin Frozr is set at. So it's still a little bump up, and that's good. You may as well. So with all that in mind, not much difference in the speeds, let's get into the benchmarks. Now, first up is Firmark. So this is running for 15 minutes, 1080p, 4 times MSAA. The Tri-X scored an average of 35 frames per second. The Twin Frozr 290 from MSI, 35 frames per second also. So, not much really to say there. Obviously, these are clocked very similar, so the benchmarks will be quite similar. Now, into Unigine Valley. This is on the Extreme HD preset. The Tri-X 290 from Sapphire, 58.8 frames per second average. The Msi Twin Frozr 58.5 frames per second average, so not much there either. Now into Unigine Heaven 4.0. This is DirectX 11. Everything maxed out. The Tri-X 52.1 frames per second. The Msi Twin Frozr 52.7 frames per second. So the MSI scored a little bit higher there. I wouldn't say that's anything. It might have just been the test I was running, and that's within the margin of error as well. So we'll just say that they're about the same. Now, Heaven again. This is in OpenGL. Once again, everything maxed out. The Tri-X 290, 37.2. The Twin Frozr 290, 37.6. So once again, barely any difference, barely at all. That's within margin of error again, so let's just say they're the same. Now onto some games. Tomb Raider, this is everything maxed out, 1080p without VSync. The Tri-X 290, 78.1 average frames per second. The Twin Frozr 290, 77.4 frames per second average. Once again, very close. Not much to say. And lastly, Bioshock Infinite. This is everything maxed out, 1080p without ambient inclusion. So that's running the user setting 1 for my settings, not any of the other ones. The Tri-X 290 scored 113.9 average frames per second. The Twin Frozr 290, 113.2 frames per second. So these cards are pretty much neck for neck, and they're the same in terms of benchmarks. We're not seeing any big difference here like we have with other cards, so there's just not much difference there at all. The Twin Frozr does score a bit better than the reference, I can tell you that right now, by about 2-3 frames, I believe. I can have a little bit of a look here for you. Yeah, so it's about 3, 4, 5 frames better than the reference. So you are getting a little bit of a benefit over the reference, but it's not a hell of a lot. Now to temperatures. Now this is the interesting part, because we've seen so much variation in the temperatures and the effectiveness of the coolers of these 290s, from something like what we recently tested, the Vapor X, which scored incredibly well, and the Power Color PCS Plus, which was one of my first reviews, which scored very well, in comparison to things like obviously the reference model, which is very, it runs up to its thermal limit, 94 degrees, and the Asus Direct CU2, which also does the same. So there's quite a bit of variation. So the first one was during Furmark. Now I look for the maximum temperature and the maximum fan speed. Now these 290s are good because they tend to go up quite quickly and then they taper off and they stay at the same temperature and same fan speed. And that's what I take, because it usually goes up to its max and then they hold themselves, which is quite good. So the Tri-X 290 ran up to 79 degrees Celsius, and that was at 46% fan speed, where the Msi Twin Frozr went up to 86 degrees Celsius, and that was at 71% fan speed. So there's a bit of difference there. We're seeing a lot less, 30% less fan speed on the Tri-X while still running 7 degrees cooler. So that's a big deal. That obviously shows the Tri-X is just a much better cooling card. So I was pretty impressed with this. With the Twin Frozr still did decent. I'll put it that way. It did decent. It didn't get close. That's still about, well, it's still 9 degrees off the thermal limit, 95. So that's good. And it didn't use up all of its fan speed, as we've previously seen cards run up to 90% of their fan speed, just trying to hold the temperatures down. And they still crept up quite high. So, okay, it did decent. But the Tri-X is much better. Now I also took the highest temperature I saw during the Unigine Heaven 4.0 DirectX 11 benchmark. Remember, everything maxed out. The highest temperature the Tri-X went to was 74 degrees Celsius. The highest temperature the Twin Frozr R9-290 got to was 78 degrees Celsius. So 4 degrees higher there for the Twin Frozr. That would be more I throw in the Heaven one again, because it gives you a more ideal. FUMAC's a torture test, so it's obviously this like worst case scenario. That's why I run it as well, to see what the card can do in sort of the worst case. But the Heaven benchmark, the temperature's taken there, is because it's more likely what the card will sit at when you're playing games. And I know this from the different games I play. I can see the temperatures they run up, and it's usually very similar to that. So those are the ones you will usually expect to get to. So that's still 4 degrees better for the Tri-X. So the Tri-X definitely wins in terms of cooling. The Tri-X cooler is much superior, and it does this at much lower fan speeds, which leads us into noise. So in saying that, with the lower fan speeds, there actually wasn't too much difference with noise. The Tri-X was better, but not by as much of a degree as you might think. They were quite similar in noise. Both of them are very quiet on idle. They're both pretty much silent, so that was good. On load, they were both are kind of moderately loud. It's nothing that would bother anyone, I don't think. Nothing out of the ordinary. Definitely a million times better than the reference 290. So yeah, but I'll let you judge for yourself. So this is what the Sapphire Tri-X R9-290 sounds like at idle. And this is what the Msi Twin Frozr R9-290 sounds like at idle. And here we have the Sapphire Tri-X 290 on load. This is during the Unigine Valley Extreme HD benchmark. And here is the Msi Twin Frozr R9-290 during the same benchmark. So there's a little bit of a difference maybe that you can hear. Personally, just from my experience running them both, I'd say the Tri-X wins, but it's not much. So I'd say purchasing one over the other in terms of noise, it's probably not going to be that much of a factor. They're both going to be quiet, and they're a lot better than the reference. So they're definitely not loud cards at all. I also have to mention that a lot of people have been asking why I don't do overclocking of these cards, and because overclocking can vary so much, so I don't want to do it for the fact that I might overclock and get a card that overclocks like crazy, and a 290, say my reference one, I've never tried overclocking it, but let's say it goes up to 1200 megahertz on the core, which I've seen a lot of them do, and then people go, wow, this card's such a good overclocker, and then or the Vapor X or whatever it might be, and they say, and then they buy it, and then they say to me, oh, well, my one only goes up to 1100 megahertz or 1050 megahertz or something, it might not overclock at all. That's why, because there's so much variation in how far a card will overclock. I know certain ones will probably do it a lot better, and that's what I tell you as well, that this card should generally overclock better. You'll have a higher chance of getting a really good overclock with this particular card over this particular card. But that's the reason why I don't do it. There's just way too much variation. So I'd rather just leave it up to you guys. And if someone's asking below how much overclock you can get out of a certain card, if you have that one, then be sure to comment. Let them know, well, I get 1150 megahertz out of mine, and stuff like that at this power limit or whatever, and help each other out. But for me personally, I won't be doing it because it's just way too much variation. So I hope that clears you up for all you guys. Now, to conclude these two cards, which one do I say wins? Now, the one thing we haven't talked about yet is price. This varies greatly also with your country and with the different companies selling them and whatnot. But generally what I tend to see is that the Msi Twin Frozr is more expensive than the Tri-X. Maybe $30 more, maybe $50 more, or they might be the same price. I've never actually seen the Msi Twin Frozr being cheaper than the Tri-X, but I mean that might be different for where you live. In saying that, if these cards are exactly the same price, I would still purchase the Tri-X. It's cooler at lower fan speeds. They're both going to perform about the same, but if you are going to overclock, there is more likelihood that you would be able to get a better overclock with the Tri-X, solely because it has a lot more fan speed left if you want to run really aggressive fan curve, and that will help bring the temperatures down. So there's just a lot less likely that you're going to hit the thermal limit on the Tri-X. And I just think it's a better card overall, and maybe slightly quieter. In saying that, if the MSI card is more expensive where you're going to buy, then definitely get the Tri-X over the MSI. And on the off chance that the Msi Twin Frozr is actually cheaper than the Tri-X, depending on where you live, then maybe take it into consideration. If you're not going to overclock, then just go with that Twin Frozr. If it's cheaper, then go with it. If you are going to overclock, then you have to weigh up, is the Tri-X going to be worth the extra money? That's if it's more expensive. But as I said, if they're the same price or the Twin Frozr is more expensive, then get the Tri-X. And that's going to basically conclude this video. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. It was actually quite fun to do. Looks-wise, I like both of these cards as well. They're both really good looking cards. The MSI does do nice packaging and nice looking cards, so that's good. But buying a graphics card just solely based off looks is like, buying a car solely based off its color. So, it's not really a good enough factor to really consider. There are good looking cards out there, but what I generally find is the really good looking cards, like the Vapor X, generally perform really good as well. Well, that's not always the case. That Asus Direct C2, that was a great looking card, and that performed horribly, so I guess it's not always the case. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't think I really have many more 290 showdowns to do. We have the PCS Plus versus Vapor X. That's what I would love to do, and I'll hopefully be able to do that for you guys, just depending on what happens. And that would be really good as a final video, because those are the two ones that I haven't put together, and they're basically what I consider the top two right now. So it'd be really good for me to put them against each other. Then I can give you guys, the viewers, my personal, what I think is the absolute best 290. There are maybe a few other non-reference 290s, but none of them are on par to be the best, so I don't think I'll do them. They're probably all more lower rung ones, and I've hit all the popular ones anyways, so they're probably not that popular, so it probably wouldn't be that good for a video. But I'll try get you the big finale, which will be the Power Color PCS Plus versus the Vapor X, and then we can do a huge rundown of all the 290s, and I can say, well, this one's first, second, third, fourth, and all the rest of it. So if you're really keen to see that, then let me know in the comments below that you are, because as always, your positivity and support really means a lot to me. It keeps me going, keeps me wanting to make these videos for you guys. So I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on Tech Showdown.